A Seattle woman allegedly bludgeons her father to death with an ice axe after he refuses to turn the lights off in their home. When police arrive on the scene, she's disheveled and covered in blood, later telling first responders, quote, "It needed to happen today." Before all this, she was a manager at Jeff Bezos' aerospace manufacturing company. But she told investigators this month's election results pushed her over the edge. So much so that she attacked her father, sat alongside his body watching him die, and later clapped out of happiness when first responders arrived to the scene. I'm Gillespie, and this is Law&Crime News. We're taking a look today at a really tragic case out of Seattle, Washington. This is our suspect, 33-year-old Corey Burke. She was already kind of in the public sphere before all of this because of her marriage to transgender writer Samantha Lee Allen. You may know Allen as the editor of the Condé Nast transgender news publication called Them, or as the author of Real Queer America, LGBT Stories from Red States. Burke also had a high-profile career working as a training program manager at Blue Origin, which is Jeff Bezos' spacecraft company. But on November 5th, election night, all that changed when police were called to her $800,000 home on the southeast side of Seattle. Neighbors called the police reporting that Burke broke all the windows in her house and was causing a disturbance. When Seattle officers arrived, there were large amounts of glass shards in the front yard and driveway of the home. This indicated the windows were likely shattered from inside the house. According to court docs, as they approached the residence, they heard a loud clapping sound from inside. That's when officers came face to face with Corey Burke, who was covered in blood. Officers later described her appearance as disheveled, saying her hair was matted in the back, and in the front, it was stuck to her face with blood. A responding officer reported Corey appeared to have a light layer of blood on the right side of her face, on her cheek, under her eye, and onto her nose. She also had a line of blood on her lower lip that was thicker and chunkier. This next part is a disturbing description. The officer wrote, quote, "The blood created a lip liner effect of blood just inside the curve of her lower lip. This is also where the hair from her head was stuck to the blood on her lip." Beyond that, Burke had scratches on her left hand and fingers. She was wrapped up in a blanket. When officers approached Burke, they asked what the clapping noise was. And Corey reported to Officer M. Roy that she had been clapping inside her home because she was happy, so she started clapping. She then told officers she wasn't sure how she'd broken the windows in her house or where the blood on her face came from, but she did say officers were not allowed inside. At this point, officers decided Burke needed to be seen at the hospital. According to court docs, they planned to detain her under emergent detention of the Involuntary Treatment Act. Basically, Burke's current state was off, and officers felt she couldn't care for herself and may be a danger to herself or to others. As Burke was taken from the scene in an ambulance, neighbors approached the police, telling them Burke's father, 67-year-old Timothy Burke, also lived in the home. Neighbors reported that Tim, quote, had a list of medical issues. They also reported that Tim did not leave the home often. This info concerned the officers, so they entered the home in what they called a community caretaking capacity, basically to make sure Burke's dad was inside and safe. In a lower level bedroom, officers located the body of an older white male lying face down on the carpeted floor. This man, later identified as Timothy Burke, was unconscious and had cuts on his left side, back, head, and ears. He also had what appeared to be a bite mark on his back. Once upstairs, police found a silver and blue ice pickaxe laying on the floor. The axe had blood on it, and soon officers determined it's what Burke likely used to murder her father just before they'd arrived. This is a really tough story to talk about, but I think it's one that's important to tell. And one of the reasons we're able to do that is because of our sponsors like Odoo. Odoo is a free all-in-one business management software with tools to help you run your business. I'm a dog owner and I built my dog Dash his own website using Odoo's website builder. It literally took minutes thanks to Odoo's easy tools like AI copywriting and drag and drop features. 5 minutes later and boom, we now have dashthedog.com. I want to say thank you to Odoo for sponsoring our videos, and if you're interested, you can start building your site now and get a free domain for the first year with our link odoo.com/lcnews7 to try Odoo for free. Later, Burke told investigators she knew, quote, "It needed to happen today." She told investigators she had been reborn near her birthday, which was October 25th, and that she knew there was something important about Election Day. Burke also noted that she was overwhelmed, saying she was working to set boundaries with her father about his emotions. About this, she said she wanted to help people change their attachment to their parents. She stated that she herself felt hyper-focused and disorganized when it came to her own attachment to her father. Here's where things get really intense though, and this is a direct quote from the affidavit. She then began to cry, saying she was upset because she thought she had acted too soon. Corey stated that tonight, when her father started arguing with her about the lights being shut off, that she just freaked out. Corey whispered to me, "Will it help?" I responded with yes. Corey then whispered, "I killed him." Burke told officers she was triggered when her father refused to turn off the lights, and she was upset about the election results, saying, quote, "Well, now the president is going to be Donald Trump." Burke admitted to using an ice axe to kill her father, later saying she had to choke him, quote, "and it was really hard, really effing hard." At some points, Burke says she felt she wasn't going to be able to choke him, so she bit him. The next part is also a direct quote from the affidavit, and it's chilling to say the least. Quote, Corey stated that once her father went limp, she felt better. Corey said that she then hit him with the ice pickaxe in the head several more times. Corey then sat next to her father and watched him until she saw that he was not breathing anymore. Corey then went upstairs and broke all of her windows in her home as an act of liberation. After all this, Corey Burke was charged with first-degree murder. So this case is definitely a puzzling one with lots to unpack. And for that, we're turning to former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney Matthew Mangino. Matt, thank you so much for coming on with us today.
Thank you, Sierra.
Okay, so on Law&Crime, we obviously cover a lot of murder. It's kind of what we do. But I rarely cover murders that have to do with an ice axe or an ice pick. That jumped out to me right away about this story. What were you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, this is really a horrific story. A woman is accused of murdering her father, first trying to strangle him and then biting him and then beating him with an ice pick. I mean, or an ice axe. I mean, that's just really different, bizarre.
Yeah, there's a lot going into this too, because there has obviously been this political divide with the election as of last week. And it sounds like that might have spurred this. There may have been a mental break. If I'm turning to like the defense attorney side of things, is that what you're thinking, that her defense may say this was a mental break?
Well, I think that's the first place that they're going to look. And I think, there's some support for that. I mean, number one, the police officers who responded to the scene, sent her off with an involuntary sort of commitment where they wanted her to be evaluated for her mental health because of the way she was acting. She had blood on her face. The windows had all been broken out of the house. So even the police recognized that there was something amiss with regard to Corey Burke. That's going to be something that the defense is really going to want to explore as in much detail as they can, because it may be a mental breakdown that caused her to act the way that she did.
And this is something we've talked about quite a bit throughout Law&Crime, but explain it to me a bit further, and maybe for audience members who don't exactly know. This would mean that at the time of the murder, Corey Burke was mentally incompetent to understand what she was doing. Is that right?
Well, yeah, in a sense. So there's really two different ways of looking at this. One would be insanity. Okay, so an insanity defense requires that the accused didn't understand the difference between right and wrong. When they did what they did, they were totally, disconnected with reality. They thought that the victim was, a wild animal or was an alien, and what they were doing was completely justified. That's insanity. And insanity is rarely used, and it's rarely successful, quite frankly. The other issue is mental illness. So is she suffering from some mental defect where maybe she did understand the difference between right and wrong, but she was so burdened by this mental handicap, this mental illness, that she acted out in a way that, she knew was wrong, but she couldn't sort of control that impulse. the difference between the two, and in some states they have, for instance, a plea of guilty but mentally ill, which has its own sort of set of guidelines in terms of sentencing. The other thing about mental illness is that it could be a mitigating factor when it comes time for sentencing. It may not justify the conduct, and it may not eliminate responsibility for the conduct, but it might impact how harshly you penalize somebody for acting who was acting under a mental health issue.
I'm glad you brought that up and kind of explained it for everyone, because I definitely wanted to touch on the mental health side of things, because it does seem to be involved in this case. But if we're taking a look at the specifics of the case itself, a lot of things really jump out to me. I mean, we talked about this ice axe, but throughout the criminal complaint, there's so much more. I mean, she's literally caught red-handed with blood on her hands, on her face when first responders arrive. And this part was strange to me too. She was clapping, and she later told investigators it was because she was happy. She knew that her father had just been killed and she was happy. What do you make of that part?
Well, yeah, again, I think that goes directly to her mental health, and possibly even her sanity, because again, someone who's insane doesn't understand the difference between right and wrong. So a reaction like clapping and saying this is something that had to happen, may actually go to her sanity. I mean, she talks about, this was liberating, and this is something that had to happen. And when she broke all the windows out of the house, that was liberating. In fact, if you look, as I'm sure you have, at the affidavit in this case, she even sits there with him after she assaults him, and he's still breathing, and she sits there and waits for him to die. I mean, so this is really unusual conduct. And does it rise to the level of insanity? Because I think that's something that really has to be explored here. I almost think it's kind of a no-brainer that this is a mental health problem. This is the woman who's in the throes of some mental breakdown. But does it rise to insanity, I think, is the issue that has to be explored here.
You brought up something that was so stark when we were going through the affidavit, in that she attempted to kill her father, and as he's laying on the floor dying, she went up to him and waited for him to die, almost as if she wanted to completely get this job done. She was going to kill her father one way or another. Is that something prosecutors would highlight to the jury, because it is something so severe? It's her own father that she allegedly murdered.
Yeah, I mean, there's two sides to every story. And so the prosecutors are going to look at this and say, hey, this is really cold. I mean, this is real malice. She sits there while he's gasping for air and waits for him to die. So certainly she had the intent to kill, and she did it in such a manner that it was, horrendous and outrageous. But on the one hand, is that really showing malice in someone who has a hardened heart, or is it showing someone who has severe mental health issues, or maybe even be insane at the time this occurred?
Leading up to the murder, too, obviously she's mentioned a lot about the election. You mentioned the liberation when she smashed out all of the windows, but she also told investigators that her dad wouldn't turn off the lights. They kind of were in some sort of argument, and then she basically snapped because she wanted the lights off and he wouldn't turn them off. We hear about this word a lot, snapped. I mean, there's that TV show, Women Snap and Kill Their Husbands. Is this something that the defense would bring up in court, that she may have just snapped?
Well, I think they're going to use that in some way to try to establish that she had a mental health breakdown. So a lot of times we hear about someone snapped, and often that's a lower form of homicide if there's a legitimate reason for snapping. So, the typical story is, somebody comes home and their spouse is in bed with another person and they kill that person. That's in the heat of passion. Okay, so that's more like a manslaughter charge than a murder charge. Because someone wouldn't turn the lights out is not going to rise to the level that you were in the heat of passion. I mean, it's not a normal reaction to kill somebody because they wouldn't turn the lights down. So I don't think that heat of passion is going to play a role in this case. But it is a strange scenario when you talk about throwing in the election and that Donald Trump was obviously going to win, and she was distraught about that. I don't know where all that leads.
We've talked a lot about her mental health status, which I'm sure the defense is going to take a look at prior to all this, what she's experiencing now and her history. But if we're talking about the rest of her history, she is an intelligent woman. I mean, she works for this spacecraft company that Jeff Bezos created. Obviously, this is a smart lady who we would assume would know the difference between right from wrong. Will all of that be factored in as well?
Well, I think it will be factored in, and again, what I think is important as you read through the affidavit, the police said that she was disheveled, that her hair was kind of matted, which means that maybe she wasn't taking care of herself, physically. What is her history of mental illness? Was she taking medication? Did she stop taking her medication? Was she in treatment? Did she stop going to treatment? So there are so many, aspects to this that have to be, and I'm sure are going to be thoroughly explored. But I think right at the outset, when you look at this case, a disheveled woman who hasn't been taking care of herself lately, who snaps over the light switch or the election and brutally murders her father, these are not the typical reactions. These are not normal reactions, and no one would suggest that they were. The question is, what's her responsibility here? Did this mental health issue impact her so much that she couldn't control herself? Or, was she just in a bad state of mind and reacted in an abnormal way?
One of the reasons I like talking to you, Matt, is because you have experience on both sides, the prosecution and the defense. So I'm going to ask you about both of these things. What do you think the next steps are on both sides?
Well, the next step obviously is going to be, some sort of preliminary hearing, probable cause hearing, to determine if there's sufficient evidence for the case to go forward. She's made admissions here, so that's not, I think, going to be a factor. And we know that the father was sort of homebound, so it wasn't, as though someone else was a caretaker and harmed him in some way. But what's going to happen right at the outset is, I would think, from the defense standpoint, is they're going to want to have a mental health evaluation, and they're going to want to explore her history, if there is any, of mental health problems. They're going to want to look at everything. If I were the defense, I want to see, how, was she productive at work? She had a good job, as you said, for 5 years. Had she had any issues recently? Was she still employed? Was she on some sort of leave? Was that leave precipitated by some sort of mental health issue? So there's so many things that need to be looked at. What was her mental health care? What was she doing? These are all, when I represent a defendant, I want to know everything I can about their life, because I want to be able to go to the prosecutor and talk about this human being, this person, not this file number, a person who committed a heinous crime. So I'm sure the defense is going to jump on this and get as much information as early as they can for presentation to the prosecution.
So you mentioned the prelim. That's something we'll definitely keep an eye out for moving ahead. But right now she's being held on $2 million bond, which is a pretty large number, pretty substantial. Mm-hmm. What do you make of that? Do you think that was the right number?
Well, I mean, the question is, in her situation, is she a danger to society? Would people be endangered by her being released and on the street? Whether she's a threat to flee I don't know if that's the case or not. You'd have to look into that in more detail to find out her background. But, in some states like Pennsylvania, where I practice, if you're charged with first-degree murder, you're not entitled to bail. So you don't get any bail at all. You just sit there until your trial is resolved. Now, she has a $2 million bond. I mean, in order to get that, she'd probably have to put up $200,000, and she's not getting that money back, or her family. So, and the fact that a family member is a victim might alienate you from other family members who might have otherwise tried to help you. So it puts her in a difficult position to make bail.
One thing's for sure, this is a heartbreaking case that we're going to want to follow and see where it leads. For what we know right now, thank you so much, Matt, for breaking it down for us and giving us some insight.
Well, thank you, Sarah. It's always great to talk with you.
Corey Burke is set to be arraigned on November 21st, and at that point, she can enter a plea. For now, she's being held in the King County Correctional Facility on $2 million bond. For Law&Crime, I'm Sarah Gillespie.